and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, we are going to revisit the fascinating topic of praise kink. Now, some of you might remember in one of my earlier episodes where I explored the psychology behind it and why it resonates with so many people. That episode seemed to really strike a chord with a lot of people, and I actually received quite a bit of feedback asking for a little bit more on this topic. So before I dive into that, I want to take a moment and thank all of you who are both new listeners and some of the people who've been sticking around with me, for going on 3 years, going to be starting year 4 in a couple of months. I really want to say thank you because, you're helping me keep growing the show and really have been along for this journey, kind of explaining things in the lifestyle and listening and chiming in. Your support really does mean a lot to me, and it's really what helps my podcast reach a lot of other people who might find this information helpful. If you are on Spotify, I ask if you could, please don't forget to give it a 5-star, like, subscribe, follow along. It really is a simple way for it to help me grow my show, connect with even more people. And for those of you who are looking to take it a step further, like somebody did for me last week, and I'm very, very thankful for it, you can support my work through the donation link that's in the show's description. Anything, no matter how generous you want to be, or, even $1, all of it goes to supporting my show, getting guests on, doing more of the worksheets for the community, all the things that I put out there so we can have the resources we need. Please feel free to do so. Now, today, I really want to take a fresh angle. I want to look at how praise can serve as really a tool of control and dynamics, but also how it can sometimes create the unintended pressure to perform. It really is a delicate balance, and I want to explore how we navigate through it thoughtfully, right? Because we really need to understand praise and praise kink alone and the effects that it has on people. Now, praise really is powerful. It can strengthen a connection in a lot of different ways. But when it's used carelessly or becomes tied to performance, it can also trap us in cycles of control or anxiety. So really, the big question here is that I'm going to try to unpack a little bit today is, how do we ensure that praise kink inside of our dynamics feels uplifting rather than limiting? So first, I kind of want to look at, and I broke this down a little bit here, so you're going to all have to bear with me for a little bit because I'm going to kind of break down some sections here. First, we're going to look at praise as a tool of control. Now, I want to take a look at the closer sides, the positive side, if you will, of praise and its essential role inside of our kink dynamics. It's really a powerful motivator when it's used thoughtfully, and it does create and deepen the emotional bonds between two people. When a dominant praises a submissive, it's not about offering kind words or approval. It can be a form of acknowledgement, saying, look, I see you, I value your effort and the trust that you put in this dynamic, and I want to reinforce that. Praise in this context goes beyond the surface level. It has the ability to build emotional intimacy and strengthen the connection between partners. Inside of our kink dynamics, where trust is paramount for a lot of us, praise can act as a bridge that fosters greater vulnerability for some, communication, even collaboration. Now, beyond just a form of acknowledgement, praise taps into an important psychological principle here, positive reinforcement. By highlighting and appreciating a submissive's actions, the dominant is signaling that their behavior is not only noticed, but it's valued. This recognition can feel incredibly validating. It creates a sense of accomplishment, and it increases the bond between the two people. Praise in this context can also be a way of deepening trust. The submissive might start to feel safer and more open to explore their desires and fantasies because they feel seen, appreciated, heard, and respected for who they are, not just for what they do. This does strengthen the dynamic and the emotional connection, and it makes praise not just a tool for reinforcing behavior, but also a way to nurture the dynamic. And I think that needs to be said. So why am I saying it? Because I think a lot of the times we tend to forget that in the lifestyle. We think we're just doing this so we can correct behavior, which I've talked about when we looked at operant control, or behavior modification in the lifestyle. And we have to be very cognizant of when these things come around. Let's look a little bit closer here at the positive side of praise. Now, from a psychological standpoint, praise plays really a significant role in our brain's reward system. When we get praise, our brain releases dopamine, right? It's that neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and motivation. That rush makes us feel good, and it reinforces the behaviors that led to the reward in the first place, and it creates a cycle of positive reinforcement. Inside of our dynamics here, this effect can be particularly powerful. When a dominant praises a sub, it's not just about the acknowledgement of their action, but it can amplify their emotional connection. And this strengthens their trust. It strengthens their intimacy. It allows them to be a little bit more raw and open between the two. Now, for example, I want you to consider for a moment where a dom is praising their sub after they've completed maybe a task or performed well during a scene. This praise goes beyond simply recognizing the task itself. It's about nurturing the submissive's sense of accomplishment, making them feel seen and validated. And by doing so, it also reinforces the shared goals of the dynamic, whether that's growth or learning or the connection. The act of praising itself serves as a reminder that both partners are aligned in their intentions and that the submissive's efforts are contributing to something meaningful. And this kind of positive reinforcement creates a deeper bond, offering not only emotional satisfaction, but also a sense of purpose within the dynamic itself. So praise here becomes a tool for mutual respect. It allows and encourages growth. And it strengthens the trust that underpins the relationship itself. It affirms the submissive's worth and enhances the connection, and it makes them feel secure and supported. But I want to look at the other side too, when praise does become a leash. As powerful and affirming as praise can be, it has the potential to shift into a tool of control when it's not used with care. Now, one common issue that arises with praise is when it's withheld or it becomes conditional, granted only when somebody meets a specific or often unspoken expectation. In this type of case, praise loses its role as an affirmation and it becomes more of a reward for compliance or performance, right? It's conditional. Over time, the dynamic then can create emotional dependency where the submissive sense of self-worth is entirely tied to receiving the dominant's approval. This dependency can be subtle at first, but as it deepens, the submissive begins to strive for praise, not only because it's a genuine feeling and is uplifting, but because they feel anxious or inadequate when it's withheld. And the presence or absence of praise becomes a measure of their value. And this can be emotionally taxing or destabilizing to them or the relationship itself. And then psychologically, this taps into something many of us have experienced before. And I mentioned it already, conditional love. Perhaps when you grew up, we only received affection or validation when we performed accordingly, to certain expectations maybe of our parents. Maybe that's doing well in school or behaving a certain way or meeting some other unexpected standard. This conditional validation leaves lasting emotional imprints that influence how we seek and receive affirmations as adults. In relationships, especially within our kink dynamics, we must unconsciously recreate these patterns, seeking praise and approval in ways that are rooted in past conditioning than in authentic connections. And for both people, the dominant and the submissive, it really is important here to recognize when praise starts. So it feels a lot less like encouragement and more, we don't want it to be feeling like a leash. We want it to feel like encouragement, right? We don't want the submissive to feel like they're tethered or the dominant needs to be tethered just because they have to say it. There shouldn't be a sense of self-worth that is solely defined by external validation. And when that type of thing happens, it becomes a sign that the dynamic may need to be recalibrated, renegotiated. Praise should be a tool for building up, not a means of controlling or manipulating. And often people use it for that. So I want to give you some practical tips here for some healthy praise. So how do we use praise thoughtfully in dynamics without falling into some of these types of traps? Well, first, for my DOMs out there, be intentional with your praise. Think about whether it's guiding or manipulating your partner. Are you doing something and rewarding them and saying and validating them, or are you doing it to get something you want? Right? Avoid using praise as the sole reward. Instead, mix it together with other forms of affirmation, physical touch, verbal encouragement, possibly during a scene. And for you submissives out there, reflect on how praise affects you. Does it empower you? Does it create anxiety when it's not there? Develop self-validation outside of your dynamic, right? While praise can feel amazing, your sense of worth shouldn't rely entirely on your partner's approval. If you can keep some of these in mind, praise can remain powerful. It can be uplifting inside of your dynamic rather than some sort of form of control. Now that we've kind of looked here at how praise is a tool of control, let's shift it to another layer in this conversation. Let's talk about performance pressure and how that can sometimes accompany it. We need to understand that praise, especially in a kink dynamic, can carry an immense emotional weight. And when praise is tied to specific actions or performance, it can unintentionally create a pressure to consistently meet or exceed expectations. Submissives, for instance, might begin to feel that, they got to continually outdo what they've done before in order to receive that affirmation, right? They want that pat on the head, be told they're a good girl or a good boy, right? This pressure can become exhausting as they constantly feel they're on stage and need to perform and meet a certain criteria to earn that praise in the first place. For dominants out there, this might manifest in setting unrealistic or constantly evolving standards, whether it's intentional or not. This is going to lead to a cycle where the submissive feels like they can never quite measure up, or that they must perform at an increasingly higher level to earn that praise. Now, what might this look like? So a submissive might find themselves thinking, if I don't get praise, I've failed, and they're down, and their heads droop down, and their body posture's low. Even if their partner enjoyed the moment fully without verbal affirmation, they may internalize the absence of that praise as a sign that they didn't do enough. This creates unnecessary anxiety, and it turns the dynamic, right? And initially, when that's supposed to be built on mutual trust and vulnerability, it's now being centered on performance. And a little bit of insight here for you. Dynamics that get rooted like this for external validation, or this tendency where we put our sense of self-worth contingent on others' approval, doesn't work. Sometimes external validation is natural and it feels rewarding, but relying too heavily on external validation creates emotional burnout, and submissives particularly might feel that their worth is directly linked to the praise that they receive. That erodes their sense of self-esteem over time. Now, what about when praise becomes pressure? Again, I've said this before, praise is meant to uplift us. It's meant to make us feel better, to motivate us sometimes. But overuse or expectation-driven praise can begin to lose its impact, and it turns it into a source of pressure instead of pleasure. And when praise becomes expected rather than earned, it starts to feel less genuine, and its emotional value diminishes. This is often referred to as hollow praise, and that's when the praise is given because it's anticipated, not because it's really deserved or even earned. Submissives may also begin to feel, performance fatigue, as I mentioned before. If praise is always tied to an outcome or perfection, they might feel mentally tired from constantly striving for that approval. And the pressure to perform at certain levels can diminish the enjoyment of the moment and the overall dynamic itself. And in the absence of praise, feelings of inadequacy can surface here. As the submissive goes without the affirming words they become accustomed to over time, they begin to internalize it as a sign that they failed, or they weren't enough, or they're not doing enough, even if their partner was content with the interaction. This becomes especially true if the praise has become a conditioned response inside of the dynamic. And here's some more insights for you on this with a little bit of a psychological twist. This is related to performance anxiety, a fear that one will fail to meet expectations. When praise is used as a measure of success, it becomes entangled with this anxiety, guys. So that makes each interaction feel like a performance rather than a natural expression of the dynamic. And over time, this leads to feelings of frustration, burnout, and self-doubt. So how do we manage all of this? Well, first, I want to talk to you subs directly. Communicate openly. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the need to earn praise, it becomes essential to start expressing this to your dominant. You should be doing this in all of the time when you're communicating, and that's the key to maintaining your dynamic in a healthy manner. It's okay to ask for a more balanced approach to praise. Second, focus on the process. Instead of fixating on the end result or waiting for the praise, try to focus on the effort, growth, and connection during the scene or the task. This shift here can alleviate the pressure to perform and help you feel more grounded in the experience itself rather than the need for that external validation from your dominant. Now, let's turn to you dominants for a second. Praise intent and growth. Rather than emphasizing here perfection or ideal outcomes, focus on the submissives' intent, their effort, their growth. Recognize their emotional and personal progress that they're making along the way. And that can be far more rewarding than simply acknowledging the perfect result. Now, also, I want you to be specific in your praise. Instead of blanket statements like, you did great, or good girl, or good boy, be more specific. Acknowledge what made that moment special for you or what you particularly appreciated. This allows the praise to feel more authentic and meaningful and grounded in the moment, as it really reflects the unique aspects of the submissive's efforts and behaviors, right? We need to understand these things because, when we are willingly submitting our control to somebody else and we are willingly taking that control over, we don't recognize the immense amount of power we have over somebody just with our words alone, right? You need to really start to think in the depths and have a bigger understanding of what's going on inside when we are in this lifestyle, so we're not abusing it. And I'm not saying you are or anybody is. It's just even unintentional, sometimes these things happen. Now, it's really important here to remember that praise, like any other tool, is only as effective as the intent behind it. If you use it thoughtfully, praise can be really a powerful means for connection, encouragement, growth, and love inside of a dynamic. If you make it conditional or you tie it to performance, it can unintentionally create pressure or anxiety, in some cases even depression. The key here lies in the awareness. Be mindful of how you use praise, both as a tool for motivation and as a means for maintaining connection. When it's used authentically and with intention, praise can remain a source of empowerment, not just for a submissive, but even for you doms out there. When it shifts into this whole cycle of expectation, it undermines that trust and that intimacy. I have some questions on today's show that, I haven't done questions in a while because a lot of the topics I've been talking about, especially like last week when I talked about BDSM in the Middle East, it was really more about understanding where we're coming from and how the world evolves over there. But when we're looking at this, I want to leave you with a couple of these questions to ponder and think about. First, when was the first time you used praise thoughtfully in your dynamic? And I want you to think about the key word I'm saying there is thoughtfully. And second, how do you ensure that it stays empowering and it doesn't become a tool of control or pressure? Because these are two main questions here that I'm really re-challenging our thoughts on praise kink. For all of those who've gotten to know me over these last 3 years, here or in my writings, or have even interacted with me through a therapeutic capacity, you understand that I challenge these notions because this is how we grow inside of the lifestyle. I'm not saying that I think praise kink is terrible. I think it's a wonderful utility as long as we use it correctly, right? So take a moment and think about how you incorporate praise into your relationships, whether you're on the giving or the receiving end, how you can ensure it continues to support and grow and strengthen your dynamic, right? Rather than create any unnecessary pressure. I know the end of the year is slowly coming up. I've got the Spankos are slotted. I've started talking to a couple of them now. I'm going to try to have a Spanko on for next week. I'm working that out, so please bear with me because when I'm not doing the show or I'm not writing, I'm working with clients and working with the military in the mornings. So I'm very busy. So for some of you who've been emailing me, I'm very sorry. I haven't gotten back to you. I will. I have seen your questions. I promise I will answer. I have the Spanko show to do. There will be a show on the psychology of anal sex. Believe it or not, it actually exists. And the most recent one that I got asked about to do, and actually have had a lot of responses, the psychology of our grooming standards in our pubic region and why we do them and so on and so forth. It's been quite interesting. I've gotten a lot of feedback on that, much deeper than I actually thought I would receive any type of feedback on. So I appreciate all of that. But let me know what you thought about today's show. I really want to hear your thoughts. I want to talk about more praise, how it's effective, all of the things that you've encountered, right? Let me know in the comments sections below. And let's kind of open this up a little bit wider and farther inside of the actual praise kink. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.